In the book Film Art, An Introduction, David Bordwell and Kristen Thompson created a simple example on how we usually have formal expectations in films. Suppose that A is the first letter of a series. Then what follows later would be AB. Then again, we should expect what comes later would be ABC. But the form of film doesn't always follow our expectations, as it could come out as ABA. And so, they continued their experiment by asking the reader what comes again after ABA. There are usually two answers, ABAB or ABAC. Using this simple example, the authors demonstrate how filmmakers don't follow these formal expectations, instead subverting and twisting it to arouse and shape viewers' expectations. Subverting these expectations also help the audience to become active instead of passive, keeping them engaged in what happens in the story. But in a world where film had become a phenomenon, the amount of films that had made the pattern ABAB or ABAC subversion is unsurprising. One prominent example is the use of jump scares in films. In years of studying films, I found horror films to be increasingly less and less scary. The reason is the cheap use of jump scares as a selling point. But in reality, jump scares weren't used like this before. Dating back in the 1970s, when Brian De Palma's Carrie introduced the jump scare to the mainstream audience. Even I, who watched it back in the 2010s, found the jump scare to be terrifying, simply because the jump scare technique has almost never been used in the film. De Palma saved the jump scare at the very last scene, whereas the previous scenes before that didn't have any. In other words, De Palma had introduced a new, fresh form of ABAC that had never been seen before, as previous filmmakers made films like ABAB. But with the release of slasher movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th, the use of jump scares have been normalized in the film industry. Entering the 2000s, jump scares become the new normal, leaving a bad taste in my mouth because it was used cheaply without any innovation and left no impact when I lived in theaters. Perhaps that's what Ari Aster realized in his latest film Beau is Afraid. To make it more terrifying, he puts numbers, symbols, or even letters that we can't recognize in the convention. Written as a paranoid man embarks on an epic odyssey to get home to his mother, the majority of the audience might have thought this film is about Beau having to confront his fear about something in the journey, a MacGuffin that exists realistically. But that's just the audience assuming its formal expectation, because Ari Aster's newest film offered something that is out of this world. For its 179 minutes runtime, none of my expectations came true. In fact, I gave up around the first hour trying to figure out how to watch this film, and this turned out to be the case for others too after watching several interviews and reviews. And so I just enjoyed the journey of Beau himself trying to reach his destination. It surprisingly didn't throw me out of the film. I genuinely appreciate what Aster is trying to do, break any convention possible. As a result, it makes this film genuinely terrifying and at the same time unintentionally funny. But how does breaking the convention play a role in making a film terrifying? I think the same reason why De Palma's Carrie jump scare is so terrifying applies in Beau is Afraid. Everything is so out of the ordinary and unexpected compared to what we experience in real life. I expect that almost nobody had to live in the hell of a neighborhood, filled with death or stress where nobody, even the police, cared. Unempathetic lunatics dominating the area, where sane residents had to live in anxiety. Part of the anxiety that came from the film is also the chain of misfortune that Beau experiences. But unlike Uncut Gems, where Howard is the proactive character that put himself in that situation, Beau is the innocent bystanders that they suddenly drag as a victim because fate saw him as an easy target. Loud music from the neighbor's house and he was wrongfully accused, causing him to unrest easily and wake up late. Picking up something he forgot, the key plugged in his door was lost, doubting whether his apartment would be safe or not. And then in the next few minutes, Beau had to experience 4 other conflicts that make it seem like the world is all against him. These events are uncomfortable, but the way Beau handles those situations made the film terrifying to hell. From the start, Beau had been introduced as a passive character, a character who reacts to everything around him and can't seem to stand up on his own 2 feet. In the convention of other films, we would usually see how the character progresses and is able to overcome that fear. But for the rest of these 30 minutes, we don't even see any progress of the character. instead staying stagnant and stuck on the fear, putting the audience on stress to keep looking at Beau suffering. Yet, breaking the convention also helped to make this film unintentionally funny. After all, humor and comedy is all about supporting the expectation of people. While the bathroom scene is built up in the tense with its scoring and lingering shot, it can be helped for us to release a bit of giggle when the revelation or punchline was revealed to be a stranger suspending himself on the ceiling, which obviously was out of reality to happen. Or perhaps the big reveal on whose Beau's father is turned out to be a giant-shaped penis monster. However, before the hilarious reveal, the movie put us on the edge of our seats as Beau was forced to face the dark, claustrophobic ceiling by his mother, putting us in suspense on what will happen to him. Personally, the above example worked quite well for me, but also akin to humor where not everyone gets it, it could act as a double-edged sword. In theory, the subversion of ABAC should have worked, but perhaps Aster took it so far that it lost its believability to the audience. Take The Conjuring as a good example. The reason why James Wan's The Conjuring worked so well despite its use of mainstream jumpscare is due to how the audience was treated with expectation, but not too far. In the famous basement scene, as the light goes out, Caroline starts to use a match, staring down the stairs where the source of sound comes. Lingering from the basement a while, the camera then cuts to Caroline's face in fear. For a long time, the audience expected that the entity would come in front of him, when suddenly we heard a clap beside her. Using the example with the tense position of A, B, when we really thought that the entity would jump out in front that causes the form ABA. But instead, the entity appeared unexpectedly beside Caroline and instead took the form of ABC. Beau is afraid does well with his convention in the first act. The use of tension in the scenes of the man in the ceiling, the call with his mother, or the medicine scene is well made. However, the next act is where everything falls, jumping to far-fetched ladder or even holding the tension there without releasing the next ladder in the pattern that causes the audience to be bored. The movie changes its settings into Roger's house that feels so distinctly different from Beau's neighborhood. Here, Ari Aster that releases some tension, such as the scene where Tony starts to drink pain. It also holds the tension considerably well when Beau is forced to smoke some pot, or when the camera captures the behavior of Jeeves in the background. But it could be argued that the act dragged on a little bit too long, with repetitiveness on how Beau is forced to stay so he could recover, despite the time constraint of his mother's dying wish to be there for the funeral. When the setting changed again into the theater trope, audience expect jumpscare, but there is almost none. Instead, being shown the imagining of Beau's life, everything goes well. This perhaps became the turning point for the audience as a walkout was imminent. Even a friend of mine actually walked out from the screening, and when I asked why, he said that there was almost nothing happening there. I won't lie, in some scenes the film dragged on a bit toward the end credit, but thinking back, perhaps the running time is actually perfect, because the film itself isn't about feeling the visible and physical terror, but rather an emotional visceral one. There's a reason why Aster did hold off the sequence ladder for tension. The answer lies in the film's theme, a movie on the subjective point of view of Beau, a man experiencing anxious thoughts and behavior. The scenes we saw in the first act might all come from Beau's mind, as if everything never happened in reality, but act as an insight to the audience about Beau's perspective. Perhaps it is after the crash, when the film started to shift from a subjective point of view into a more objective one, the perspective of the audience watching everything on the screen. It's the reason why the film started to slow down a bit, removing all the chaos where almost nothing happens. But the tension is all still there to terrify us, prompting the audience to expect something to happen. I slowly got embraced into Beau's character, feeling all the anxious thoughts of what's going to happen. Yet in the end, nothing happened, and we were all toyed by Aster once again as he breaks the convention through subverting expectations. Aster already proved that he is a director capable of subverting convention through horror movies in his previous two films. With Beau is Afraid, it seems that he hasn't run out of ideas yet by toying with our expectations. In the first hour, a non-stop horror ride through Beau's perspective, and the next hour, we have to deal into a much slower pace that horror fans wouldn't expect. But for me, the anxiety is still there, with Aster continuing to hold the tension until the end, like a nightmarish trip waiting for something to come out. Yet looking at the box office numbers, Beau is Afraid is undeniably defined as a box office bomb, unable to recoup its $35 million budget. Perhaps the audience isn't ready to experience this visceral horror, deeming this film as weird, with almost no adrenaline rush to offer after the first hour. The trend within horror film could be seen this day, where the audience wants to find something more stimulating to release the tension from our body through spectacle and scary visuals. Alas, still wanting to find something in the horror genre that sticks to the convention, if not subverting less to match the expectation of the audience. But for me, through Beau is Afraid, I discover a new horror, a horrifying experience through visual emotion instead of loud scares. All thanks to how Astor loved playing the convention to give a new experience in horror.